What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is February 16th, 2026, exactly 8 p.m. where I'm at right now. And we are completing our 18th book in our Book to React series today. We are finishing the book Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton, the founder of the Black Panther Party, along with Bobby Seale. If you're watching the vertical live stream, I have a picture that's not the cover of the book, and I wanted to end with this picture. It is a picture of Bobby Seale and Huey Newton, supposedly in 1973, after both of them beat their murder raps and after both of them had established a party, a revolutionary vanguard organization to help lead people in the fight against racism, white supremacy, and capitalism. Much love to these two brothers. These two brothers here are my heroes, and I'm so glad that we booked together. Hopefully, you found Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton to be an enlightening read as well. And if you're watching this in the future, I encourage all of you to buy the book. Make sure this book stays in print, or read it yourself online if you're able to find it. And shout out to everybody who's been showing love to these live streams. This is by far the biggest book react we've ever done. I repeat, this is the biggest book react we have ever done. The most views, the most attention, the most comments, the most likes. In every metric, this book has been the biggest part of the Book to React series. And I'm just so humble to say thank you to Huey P. Newton for allowing me to dive into his world, because he didn't have to write this book, but he wrote this book for us in posterity. And I want to give a shout out and thanks to everybody who helped keep Huey's name alive, memory alive, and story alive. So yeah, I'm just very honored that I could be the conduit for keeping Huey's memory alive. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, without further ado, we will be reading the final 3 chapters of this book, chapter 31, 32, and 33. And the epilogue as well. Hopefully it's not too long. We might be on live for, an hour and a half as we blow through these pages. It's not that long, and hopefully you find it engaging. Let's get into it right here. Chapter 31 of Revolutionary Suicide, the autobiography of Huey P. Newton. Surviving. Shortly after David Hilliard was incarcerated, jury selection began for my second trial. The same problems in selecting an impartial and fair jury faced Charles Gary once again. One of the persons questioned for my panel had just served on David's jury. Under oath, he stated that he knew nothing about the Black Panther Party and its leaders. When it was pointed out that he had just convicted David Hilliard, he said he did not know David was a party leader. It was clear the prosecution was out to get a hanging jury. Being tried a second time on the same charges was a strange experience, a combination of suspense and deja vu. Most of the time, I was bored by what seemed a stale rerun of a familiar and flawed drama. It was just another charade to justify, just another charade. It was just another charade to justify their attempts to put me back in state prison for another 13 years. The major difference between the two trials was that this time I was out on bail, which meant that during the evenings I could conduct party business. Also, I could not be found guilty of a more serious offense than the one I had been convicted of the first time: voluntary manslaughter. Lowell Jensen, the first prosecutor in the first case, had become district attorney, and an assistant named Donald White was arguing for the prosecution. He was no match for Charles Gary, but it did not matter anyway, because all he had to do was follow the script from the first trial. The trial opened and moved along, with most of the same set of witnesses testifying. Once again, the prosecution leaned heavily on the testimony of Officer Haynes, and during Charles Gary's cross-examination of him, the first major surprise of the trial came, one that said a great deal about our opponents. During his questioning of Haynes, Gary was making the basic point that when I was ordered out of the car by Officer Frey, I was carrying only my criminal evidence law book. The book had my name written in it, in my own handwriting, and my blood was all over its pages. pages. It had been a very important piece of evidence in the first trial, for it countered the prosecution charge that I had carried a gun that night. Gary turned to the court clerk and asked for the book, which had been entered into evidence in the first trial. The clerk replied that it had been lost. For a moment, I could not believe my ears, but I quickly realized that they were serious. They actually did not have the book. How could such a major piece of defense evidence disappear? Their explanation was that when the appellate court reviewed the trial and the evidence, they had taken everything related to the case, and somewhere between the appellate court and the Alameda County Courthouse, the book had been lost, although all the other exhibits were available. My second trial, which had at first seemed just a charade, now appeared to be turning into a circus. Although he claimed to be upset by the loss of the book, the prosecutor was not too convincing. He offered a photograph of it to be entered into evidence and generously stipulated that the photograph was a facsimile of my book and had indeed been a part of defense evidence in the first trial. But a photograph is not a book. The prosecution had a witness on the stand who said that I had turned and started firing at 2 policemen on October 28th. Yet the piece of evidence that disproved this claim, the only object I was carrying that night, was missing. And now they wanted to replace it with a facsimile. The jury could not see my bloodstains on the pages. They could not read my name on the flyleaf. And they could not see where I had underlined the relevant portions of the criminal code about reasonable cause for arrest, the section I always read to police and citizens during our encounters. Charles Gary protested this loss of crucial defense evidence and asked for a mistrial. It was denied. Then the trial went from charade to farce. The state had still another stunt to pull, and it came the next day when a squad of plainclothes men escorted a timid and very frightened man into court, Del Ross. It had not occurred to us that he would be called as a witness in the second trial, because his credibility had been so thoroughly destroyed in the first. But we should have known better. Del Ross appeared out of nowhere. Well, not exactly out of nowhere, since he related how the prosecution had sequestered him in another state and brought him in for this trial, just as they had done with Henry Greer. I suspect that Ross had been pushed around and threatened because he was very fearful. The papers referred to him as an ex-motorist in reference to his explanation that he had been traveling since the first trial. Shout out to Jevin Schoenbaum up in the chat and everybody else who's joining the conversation. We are finishing Revolutionary Suicide, Huey P. Newton's book, today. This is the final reading of this text. And shout out to Jevin Schoenbaum, who's been here since, I would say, episode 2 or 3 of reading this excellent piece by Huey P. Newton. Continuing. On the stand, Ross said what was expected to him. He testified that he had lied in the first trial and then went on to give the testimony that he had offered before the grand jury. After listening to his admission that he had perjured himself in the first trial, the court was nonetheless agreeable to his placing his testimony in evidence. Yet anybody who saw that intimidated soul meekly agreeing to the questions of the prosecutor would have had trouble taking his testimony seriously. I marveled that they had the gall to put him on. All right. So shout out to Jevin Schoenbaum saying, "Fuck Donald Trump." Ain't that the truth? Fuck Donald Trump and everybody who loves him. Continuing here. All right. At first, I felt sorry for him all over again, but I soon became angry with the prosecutor for staging such a ridiculous farce and calling it a trial. I was looking forward to the moment when Charles Gary would go to work on Ross and his cross-examination. But because the district attorney had not told us that Ross would be called to the stand, Gary was unprepared to question him. He asked for a recess to return to San Francisco and get the tape and transcript of the interview he had held with Ross before the first trial. This evidence was extremely important because it demonstrated what an unreliable witness Ross was and cast doubt on his testimony. But the judge denied this reasonable request and ordered him to proceed with his questioning of the witness. At this point, I could not hold back my anger no longer. I felt that a cruel injustice was being done to us, and the need to make my views known was too strong to be overcome by the protocol of the courtroom. I stood up and declared that the trial would not continue unless they gave us time to prepare a proper cross-examination of Del Ross. The defense was justified in asking for time, I declared, particularly in light of the fact that the day before an important piece of defense evidence had been confiscated by the state. Now they refused us an hour's recess to secure critical information, although the prosecutor was routinely granted such delays. The courtroom was tense as I went on and told them that I had stood between the ignorance of my own people and the violence of the state with a law book in my hand, and now you have lost it. I told them to take me back to jail. Turning to the angry crowd, I urged them to be calm. If they touch me, you know what to do, I said, but be disciplined now. The people were beautiful and remained in place until I told them to leave the courtroom. Then they congregated in the hall outside and refused to clear the building. So I went out of the courtroom into the hall where the police were beginning to gather their forces. It was obvious that they wanted a mass arrest so that we would be caught in a net of charges, bail, and trials. Realizing that they ought to clear the building, I told them to go, that I could deal with the state and serve time for this. They left. All right. Giving a shout out to everybody up in the comment section. All right. Shout out to Holly Preppy 68. Shout out to Jevin Schonenbaum again up in the chat showing love. We're going to continue right here with Revolutionary Suicide, the autobiography of Huey P. Newton, the founder of the Black Panther Party. As we are halfway done with Black History Month and Ramadan is coming up tonight. Ramadan starts tonight. If you didn't know, now you know. You have no excuse not to fast. We're going to be finishing Revolutionary Suicide this evening, right here, right now, with all the people. Continuing here, Huey P. Newton says, "Then, amid the general confusion, I went back into the courtroom and approached Del Ross on the witness stand. The poor brother's eyes were wild with fear. 'Why are you sitting there, brother?' I asked him. 'Are you afraid?' A detective interrupted and told him not to listen to me. But I continued, 'Why do you obey him when he tells you not to speak?' 'I don't hate you. I love you, brother.' The police saw that my words were having an effect on him, so they took him away. When the courtroom was cleared, Gary left for his office in San Francisco. My plan had worked. I had recessed the trial, and now Gary would have time to check his office. Everything was under control, even though there were police everywhere, and the judge did not seem to know what was going on. I went upstairs to the jail and told the guards to open my cell, but they wanted me to sign papers admitting myself back into jail, thus revoking my bail. I refused to sign anything. 'Just put me in jail,' I said. They opened the cell for me and said they would wait a few hours while Gary looked for the transcript. But if, after that, I did not sign the papers, they would kick me out of the jail. I laid down in the cell and fell asleep. Gary searched thoroughly for the tape and the transcript of his interview with Del Ross in 1968, but he could not find them. The office had been burglarized a few weeks before, and the Ross evidence was among the items that had been stolen. So empty-handed, but not discouraged, he returned to Oakland, and the trial resumed with his cross-examination of Ross. We need not have worried. Even without the transcript, Ross was such a strange witness that his credibility was destroyed all over again. First, he admitted to the court that he had been lying in the testimony he had given only an hour before. He had been guilty of perjury not merely once or twice, but 17 times. Second, he admitted that he was afraid of the district attorney and everyone else in the courtroom, the judge, the jurors, everybody. As if this were not enough, Ross then asked the judge's permission to address a question to the court, and the judge granted his request. There was a moment's silence. Then, looking out into the courtroom, Ross said, "Is there anybody here who believes in the truth? Would you raise your hand?" This was such a bizarre development that the entire courtroom sat stunned. No one moved or spoke except the district attorney, who raised his hand and said, "Mr. Ross, I believe in the truth." Okay. The judge leaned over and told White to put his hand down. Then Del Ross continued, "Because I don't know what the truth is myself." With that, Ross's effectiveness as a witness was demolished. I was sorry to see him so dehumanized, for he seemed to be living proof of what American society can do to oppressed and poor people. A despicable abuse of power had intimidated a weak man, a man who had little to lose, but who was terrified to let go of that. The whole pattern of his life had taught him to fear and defer to those who control society's institutions. At last, faced with the crucial test that resembled all the earlier small, humiliating choices in his life, he had no resources to help him resist. He gave in again, and his defeat ended in misery and shame. Sad. What a sad story. And if you don't remember, or if you're just not tuning in, Huey P. Newton is talking about being on trial for a murder he did not commit. He was accused of murdering a police officer, and the police are pulling out all sorts of stops to try to get him convicted. And one of the ways they're trying to convict him is calling this poor black man who was a bus driver in San Francisco who claimed he was a witness to the murder. They coached this poor black man to, basically recite the police's line about how Huey is just this monster who's out here killing cops, and this poor black man coming up in this second trial where his testimony is just being demolished, and he's perjured himself on the stand 17 times. He's just fully defeated. And I think this goes to show that, in Huey's era, there was a battle between the Toms and the new free blacks, you know what I'm saying? And the Toms were sort of like older black people who were taught to look down when a white man talks to you and, step off the sidewalk when a white man's coming. And these new young blacks who are born, like the boomers in them, you know what I'm saying? Because Huey is literally a boomer. Like, they're like, we're not having that. We're not saying yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. We looking the white man in the eyes and telling them, fuck the police. You know what I'm saying? So I think that was a struggle that it's hard to relate to in our age, because I was born in 1990, and if you're a millennial or Gen Z, the timing issue isn't the problem. Oh, it recently became a problem again because now we have wild, radical black Republicans and black MAGA running around. But the Tom issue is not the problem. You know what I'm saying? For a long time, it's just been the backwardness of a lot of people. You know what I'm saying? Because a lot of us got bought into materialism, capitalism, and the chase of the petty bourgeoisie lifestyle. But I digress. Let's go here to the comment section. Jevin Schonenbaum is saying, F Donald Trump. Exactly. That's the message. That's the attitude. That's the feeling. Fuck Donald Trump and everybody who loves him. You get what I'm saying? All right. Let's continue here. Continuing. Oh, sorry. Hopefully you can still see me. I don't know why it stopped. Anyway, continuing here. So, after this thunderbolt, everybody needed a respite, and the court recessed for the weekend. Later that day, thinking about what had happened to Ross and how the prosecution had manipulated him, I had an idea. What I planned to do would certainly end the trial and might even send me back to jail, but I felt it would be an important political statement. When the trial resumed the next Monday morning, I would stand up again and announce that I was making a citizen's arrest of the prosecutor for aiding and abetting a felony, to wit, the perjured testimony of Del Ross. Then I would ask the judge to assist me in making this arrest of the prosecutor. Since the judge would undoubtedly refuse to do so, I would then turn to the jury and ask them to assist me in making a citizen's arrest of the prosecutor and judge. My action would demonstrate to the public that it is difficult for an ordinary citizen to get justice in the courts when those who are trying him break the law to get him convicted. There is no recourse but to appeal to the people's sense of justice. Such a political message would have a strong impact on the consciousness of the people. My lawyers were skeptical, but they agreed to do the legal research on my plan, since I wanted a solid legal foundation for what I was about to do. However, after reading the law, they told me it was not possible to make a citizen's arrest of a district attorney or judge. They were officers of the court, and only a grand jury could indict them. I abandoned the ploy, although still convinced I had a good point. What other avenue was open when law enforcers could break the law with impunity, while ordinary citizens have no defense against them? If it had been possible to arrest the district attorney and judge, I might have had to go back to jail. But a strong point about the need for revolutionary justice would have been made. The remainder of the trial was uneventful. The same ballistics experts testified about the same things, and it became even more boring with repetition. This time, our defense was much shorter than during the first trial. I took the stand first and told the truth about the incident. Prosecutor White then cross-examined me, performing a lot of common antics in the process, but he was not too successful in his attempts to undermine my testimony. I did not budge an inch. He lacked the polish and skill of Lowell Jensen, and as a result, our exchange was neither challenging nor stimulating. The jury deliberated for what seemed a long time in view of the fact that this was a second trial and there were fewer charges. The longer the deliberations dragged on, the more confident I became that someone was holding out for acquittal. Finally, the jury filed back into court and told the judge that they were hopelessly deadlocked, 11 for conviction and 1 for acquittal. The judge declared a mistrial and dismissed them. I would have to face yet another trial. During the third trial, everything really went our way. It was the same tired old show all over again. Prosecutor Donald White, Herbert Haynes, Henry Greer, and Del Ross, and their supporting cast. However, the whole scene had become more and more Kafkaesque. The script did not run the same way, and the first evidence that the plot was changing in our favor came when Officer Haynes forgot his lines. All through the first and second trials, Haynes had said that Gene McKinney and I were the only ones at the scene of the incident besides himself and Frey. Then in the third trial, he said that he remembered another person at the scene, a man who had on a light tan jacket but who was not the passenger. The third man came to light while he was being cross-examined by Gary, and when Haynes realized that he had forgotten his script, he became confused and dropped his head in shame. Shortly after that, when the court took a recess that the jury filed out, the district attorney grabbed Haynes by the collar and scolded him in the open courtroom. Haynes's memory slip had changed everything, and I knew then he would win this one in spite of the testimony of Henry Greer. A third man had Haynes harbored the third man in his memory all this time? Had an amnestic curtain lifted for the policeman who had never been the same since that night? Was the third man the real killer of Frey, whom Haynes had covered up for all these years? Had the state given up and was the introduction of the third man their way out? The questions were academic now, the state's motives and conspiracies banal and irrelevant. When it came time for the defense to present its case, Gary was ready with a special surprise for the prosecution. He was going to disprove the entire testimony of Henry Greer. One surprise had been carefully prepared during the first and second trial, and now we were ready to bring it out. Henry Greer had never been at the scene of the October 28th shooting. Shout out to Layla Henderson up in the chat, showing love, as well as everybody else who is joining our reading of Revolutionary Suicide, the finale of Huey P. Newton's autobiography. Shout out to Layla Henderson, S8H, and everybody else up in the live stream chat right now. Continuing. During Gary's cross-examinations of the prosecution witnesses, especially the police who were there that morning, he had been careful always to ask about the location of and get a description of every person and every object within a radius of 60 yards from the scene of the shooting. He had asked each policeman to describe everything he had observed when he arrived. Not one policeman would say he saw a bus. Why? Because there was no bus. None of them was willing to perjure himself, even though all of them were willing to let the bus driver commit perjury. All right? Shout out to DLT Play. Shout out to DLT Play up in the comment section, showing love. Shout out to him and everybody else up in the comments. Leave 67 comments. I want to see 67 comments from DLT Play. And yeah, let's continue reading Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton. So, Charles Gary called to the stand, the one man who was able to verify Greer's route and time schedules the night of the incident, the supervisor for the bus company. We had wanted the supervisor to testify in the earlier trials, but we were also afraid that he might lie and support the perjury of Greer. Still, we wondered why the prosecution had not brought in the timer and supervisor to bring up Greer's story. We were still cautious about using his testimony during the second trial, but we began to gather all the evidence to the effect that in the space of 60 yards in every direction, no policeman had seen a bus. In the first trial, we were even afraid to bring in these measurements because we thought they might spring the supervisor on us. So we waited and waited, making an airtight case against Greer before we finally discredited his testimony. All right. So shout out to Layla Henderson and DLT up in the comment section, showing love. Thank you for joining the live stream, and leave as many comments as you can. I want to see 1 million comments. I want to see that chat going at the speed of light. A lot of comments, show a lot of love, so that we get more people tuned in to this radical messaging right here. I need the help of the people to spread this message wide. 1 million comments, or 67 comments at the very minimum. Continuing. So Greer had testified that he was within 10 feet of the whole incident, that he had driven up in his bus and braked very near to the parked automobiles, and he had seen the shooting clearly. Okay, I apologize. Greer is the bus driver, not Del Ross. Del Ross is another guy who claimed to be a witness, but was just basically broken by the state. Anyway, with a 60-foot bus so close to the scene, it will be difficult for a policeman to miss it, and yet no one of them testified to seeing it. When we became sure of our evidence, we called in the bus superintendent, and he testified that according to the company records of the route, Greer followed in Greer's own time schedule. It was impossible for Greer to have been at his checkpoints and also at the scene of the shooting. According to the supervisor's records, Greer must have been at least 1.5 to 2 miles away at the time of the incident. Thus, the bus supervisor backed up the police who testified for the prosecution. There was no bus on the scene. Shout out to Harshad786 up in the comments section. Rest in peace, Tupac Shakur. And we are reading the work of the Panther who brought us Tupac Shakur, because without Huey P. Newton, it's very likely that Tupac would have never been born, because his mother and father met as members of the Black Panther Party chapter in New York City. So we are reading Huey P. Newton's work, Revolutionary Suicide, the autobiography, the memoir of our great ancestor. Shout out to Wheelchair Jimmy up in the comments section as well. I appreciate everybody showing comments, showing love. Let's get those comments rolling. I need that chat going at 1 million miles per second. I need a lot of comments so we can continue. We can continue to get Huey P. Newton's radical messaging out there. We need more people out there hearing the words of Huey P. Newton. Shout out to Afshana Shansari, 2683. Afshana Sansari, 2683. Shout out to you, and shout out to Layla Henderson once again. Let's continue here. So, the prosecutor's case was steadily growing weaker. First Ross, now Greer. This time the jury deadlocked 6-6, and the judge finally had to declare another mistrial. I was summoned to appear in court again on December 15th to have the date set for a fourth trial, but I felt that the charges would be dropped because the prosecutor's main witnesses were no longer credible. I was right. At the hearing on December 15th, Lowell Jensen appeared in court. I had not seen him since my bail hearing during the summer of 1970. After the judge opened the proceedings, Jensen rose to speak, saying that he had never thought he would see the day when he would be in court asking for a dismissal of my case. The judge looked at him. "Are you asking for a dismissal in the interest of justice?" he asked. Using the proper legal terminology, Jensen replied, "No, it's not in the interest of justice, because it's not just. I didn't think I would ever have to say these words, but I think the case should be dismissed." Just a hating-ass prosecutor. Fuck the DA. Fuck the district attorney. Fuck the state prosecutor. Fuck the federal prosecutors. They're all bastards, just as bad as the cops. Just as bad as the cops. What a hater. Of course it's in the interest of justice to free Huey P. Newton if you keep on trying him for this murder and the jury keeps coming back and saying there's reasonable doubt. Ain't that how the court system is supposed to work? Isn't that justice in America? It should be beyond a reasonable doubt that a person is guilty, especially of the highest crime, murder. Yet and still, this racist district attorney is saying, yeah, it hurts me to say this, even though Huey keeps on beating our ass at trial 3 times in a row. It hurts me to say this, but We have to let him out. Ooh, the case should be dismissed. It's not in the interest of justice, but he needs to be dismissed. Anyway, I'm sorry. I hate our justice system so much. Anyway, continuing here. The dismissal was granted, bringing to an end the insane and unjust series of legal assaults that had started more than 4 years earlier. I had spent 33 months in prison. My family had suffered untold personal agony. The party had spent many thousands of dollars in my defense, money that could have been used to help the community. Jensen was right, but not in the sense he intended. Justice had not been served. Whew! And that's the end of that. That's the end of chapter 31, where Huey is talking about finally beating the feds. And not the feds, he beat the state of California. Beat the state of California over his head 3 times. Took it to trial 3 times. They couldn't make it stick to your boy. Couldn't make it stick to your boy. And he bounced back. Bullets just bouncing off of him. Boom, boom, beat another trial, beat another trial. That's what Huey was doing. And he did that for 4 years of his life. 4 years of his life. 4 years of his life. Crazy. Crazy, but I'm glad he was able to do it. And once again, this is very inspiring for me because right now I'm in university. I'm in university right now and I'm struggling. Going back to university has financially ruined me. Going back to university has been one of the most difficult years of my life. But seeing that Huey went through 4 years of literally facing the death penalty, the state of California was doing everything in its power to kill this young black man at 25 years old. The least I could do at 35 years old is get educated again. And even then, Huey P did all of this and got his degrees furthest as you could go. Got his PhD. Come on now. Is this not one of our heroes? Is this not one of our heroes? For Black History Month, should we not all be proud of what Huey did and be inspired to take it even further than what he did? You know what I'm saying? But I continue here. We only have 2 more chapters to go in Revolutionary Suicide, the autobiography of Huey P. Newton. Let's go to chapter 32. It's titled China, and it goes something like this. The people who have triumphed in their own revolution should help those still struggling for liberation. This is our internationalist duty, said by Chairman Mao Zedong, in the Little Red Book. Today, when I think of my experiences in the People's Republic of China, a country that overwhelmed me while I was there, they seem somehow distant and remote. Time erodes the immediacy of the trip. The memory begins to recede. But that is a common aftermath of travel, and not too alarming. What is important is the effect that China and its society had on me, and that impression is unforgettable. While there, I achieved a psychological liberation I had never experienced before. It was not simply that I felt at home in China. The reaction was deeper than that. What I experienced was the sensation of freedom, as if a great weight had been lifted from my soul and I was able to be myself, without defense or pretense or the need for explanation. I felt absolutely free for the first time in my life, completely free among my fellow men. This experience of freedom had a profound effect on me because it confirmed my belief that an oppressed people can be liberated if their leaders persevere in raising their consciousness and in struggling relentlessly against the oppressor. All right. Shout out to Nelson Moreno up in the chat. He says he too is financially ruined. We all are, sir. We all are. But I appreciate your donation to the fund, to the cause of sending a young black man through university. Yes, for the price of a cup of coffee, you can help a young black man get his education. Get his education. I appreciate that, Nelson, so much. All donations are appreciated, and they go directly towards the tuition fund. Going here to Huey P. Newton's travel to China, you know, what he's saying right there, I find so relatable. When I first traveled abroad, my first real far trip abroad out of the United States by myself as a man was in Guyana. I didn't exactly feel free, but when I first hit Tunisia, boy, I felt free. But that was an experience. When I first hit Tunisia and landed in Africa, you know what I'm saying? And I'm pretty sure I'm one of the first people in my family's lineage for hundreds of years to go back to Africa. You know what I'm saying? That shit moved me a lot. So, yeah, what he was saying here about China is very relevant for me and very relatable. Continuing here. Because my trip was so brief and made under great pressure, there were many places I was unable to visit and many experiences I had to forego. Yet there were lessons to be learned from even the most ordinary and commonplace encounters. A question asked by a worker, the response of a schoolchild, the attitude of a government official. These slight and seemingly unimportant moments were enlightening, and they taught me much. For instance, the behavior of the police in China was a revelation to me. They are there to protect the people and help the people, not to oppress them. Their courtesy was genuine. No division or suspicion exists between them and the citizens. This impressed me so much that when I returned to the United States and was met by the tactical squad at the San Francisco airport, they had been called out because nearly 1,000 people came to the airport to welcome us back. It was brought home to me all over again that the police in our country are an occupying, repressive force. I pointed this out to a customs officer in San Francisco, a black man who was armed, explaining to him that I felt intimidated seeing all the guns around. I had just left the country, I told him, where the army and the police are not the opposition to the people, but are their servants. That's something I can relate to too. When I traveled back to America, you know what I'm saying? Like when you enter any country, you're going to see like armed men at the ports of entry, right? When you land at the airport, you go through customs, you go through passport control, you're going to see some guns. You know what I'm saying? You might land in a country where them boys carrying big sticks, or you might see them little peepees. You know what I'm saying? You don't know what you're going to see. But there is something about when you land in America and you go through customs and border patrol, boy, it's something else. There is that intensity. Even I feel it as a citizen. You know what I'm saying? That they're going to do something to me. And I haven't been back to America since all the ICE stuff started popping off. The last time I was in America, Trump was literally getting sworn in. And then he started doing Doge shit. And then I was out. You know what I'm saying? So I've been fortunate enough not to live in Trump's America most of his presidency. You know what I'm saying? So glad about that. But it is very strange, you know, coming back to America and getting hit with the reality like, oh, our police kill people and those people are us. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, we only have about 10 more pages left to go on Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton. Let's continue right here. I received the invitation to visit China shortly after my release from the penal colony in August 1970. The Chinese were interested in the party's Marxist analysis and wanted to discuss it with us as well as show us the concrete application of theory in their society. I was eager to go and apply for a passport in late 1970, which was finally approved a few months later. However, I did not make the trip at that time because of Bobby's and Erica's trial in New Haven. Nonetheless, I wanted to see China very much. And when I learned that President Nixon was going to visit the People's Republic in February 1972, I decided to beat him to it. My wish was to deliver a message to the government of the People's Republic and the Communist Party, which would be delivered to Nixon when he made his visit. Okay, gangster. I made the trip in late September 1971 between my second and third trials, going without announcement or publicity because I was under an indictment. I had only 10 days to spend in China, even though I had no travel restrictions and had been given a passport. The California courts could have tied me down at any time because I was under court bail, so I avoided the state's jurisdiction by going to New York instead of directly to Canada from California. Because of my uncertainty about what the power structure might do, I continued to avoid publicity after reaching New York, since it was not implausible that the authorities might place a federal hold on me, claiming illegal flight. By flying from New York to Canada, I was able to avoid federal jurisdiction, and once in Canada, I caught a plane to Tokyo. Police agents knew of my intentions, and they followed me all the way, right to the Chinese border. Two comrades, Elaine Brown and Robert Bay, went with me. I have no doubt that we were allowed to go only because the police believed we were not coming back. If they had known I intended to return, they probably would have done everything possible to prevent the trip. The Chinese government understood this, and while I was in China, they offered me political asylum. But I told them I had to return, that my struggle is in the United States of America. This is where I disagree with Huey. If you can get out of the United States, especially if you can get in on the ground floor of China, bruh, it's 1970-something China. You're on the ground floor, bruh. You know you could be balling right now. You could be balling if you got in on the ground floor when Shanghai looked like Bangladesh. Back when Chengdu looked like Chattanooga. Bruh, imagine getting in on the ground floor of China and turning down that opportunity, bruh. That's like Steve Jobs offering you Apple stock for free. And you say, nah, bruh, I gotta build my own computers, bruh. I gotta do it. Nah, man, fuck that. Fuck that. If you can get out of America safely, freely, and also legally, my guy, take that. Take that. Pause, no diddy. Anyway, I'm gonna continue here. Going through the immigration and customs services of the imperialist nations was the same dehumanizing experience we had come to expect as part of our daily life in the United States. In Canada, Tokyo, and Hong Kong, they took everything out of our bags and searched them completely. In Tokyo and Hong Kong, we were even subject to a skin search. I thought I had left that routine behind in the California penal colony, but I know that the penitentiary is only one kind of captivity within the larger prison of a racist society. When we arrived at the free territory where security is supposed to be so tight and everyone suspect, the comrades with the red stars on their hats asked us for our passports. Seeing they were in order, they simply bowed and asked us if the luggage was ours. When we said yes, they replied, "You have just passed customs." They did not open our bags and when we arrived or when we left. Shout out to China. As we crossed into China, the border guards held their automatic rifles in the air as a signal of welcome and well-wishing. The Chinese truly live by the slogan, "Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun," and their behavior constantly reminds you of that. For the first time, I did not feel threatened by a uniformed person with a weapon. The soldiers were there to protect the citizenry. The Chinese were disappointed that we had only 10 days to spend with them and wanted us to stay longer. But I had to be back for the start of my third trial. Still, much was accomplished in that short time, traveling to various parts of the country, visiting factories, schools, and communes. Everywhere we went, large groups of people greeted us with applause, and we applauded them in return. It was beautiful. At every airport, thousands of people welcomed us, applauding, waving their little red books, and carrying signs that read, "We support the Black Panther Party, down with U.S. imperialism," or "We support the American people, but the Nixon imperialist regime must be overthrown." Shout out to the Chinese. I know there are a lot of racist Chinese people, a lot of anti-black Chinese people, xenophobic Chinese people, but that doesn't mean that we just discard all of China, because I think Harry Haywood, if I remember right, went to China as well and got a lot of love and treatment and good treatment from not only the party officials that met him, but also the regular people in China. So once again, the Chinese people who are woke are our allies, especially against anti-blackness and racism and capitalism. You know what I'm saying? There's not a lot of those people, unfortunately, because we're living in a time of regression and right-wing expansion. But still, there are those people out there who are anti-racist in China and other parts of the global south or developing world, or the red world, I would say. But I'm going to continue. We also visited as many embassies as possible. Sightseeing took second place to Black Panther business and our desire to talk with revolutionary brothers. So the Chinese arranged for us to meet the ambassadors of various countries. The North Korean ambassador gave us a sumptuous dinner and showed films of his country. We also met the ambassador from Tanzania, a fine comrade, as well as delegations from North Vietnam and the Provisional Revolutionary Government of South Vietnam. We missed the Cuban and Albanian embassies because we were short of time. When news of our trip reached the rest of the world, widespread attention focused on it, and the press was constantly after us to find out why we had come. They were wondering if we sought to spoil Nixon's visit, since we were so strongly opposed to his reactionary regime. Much of the time, we were harassed by reporters. One evening, a Canadian reporter would not leave my table despite my asking him several times. He insisted on hanging around, questioning us, even though we had made it plain we had nothing to say to him. I finally became disgusted with his persistence and ordered him to leave. Seconds later, the Chinese comrades arrived with the police and asked if I wanted him arrested. I said no, I only wanted him to leave my table. After that, we stayed in a protected villa with a Red Army honor guard outside. This was another strange sensation, to have the police on our side. We had been promised an opportunity to meet Chairman Mao, and the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party felt that this would not be appropriate since I was not a head of state. But we did have 2 meetings with Premier Chu Enlai. One of them lasted 2 hours and included a number of other foreign visitors. The other was a 6-hour private meeting with Premier Chu and Comrade Chiang Ching, the wife of Chairman Mao. We discussed world affairs, oppressed people in general, and black people in particular. Very interesting. Very interesting. Chiang Ching. We're discussing her in the live stream call-in show that we're doing of watching the documentary Can't Get You Out of My Head. So very interesting that it's very interesting that Chairman Mao didn't want to meet Huey P. Newton, but I think at this time Chairman Mao was very, very sick. If I remember right, he's going to die soon, like around 1970 something. You know what I'm saying? So Chairman Mao was probably very sick. I can't remember if Harry Haywood met Mao. I'll have to reread Black Bolshevik or just skim through that to find that section. But I feel like Harry Haywood was able to get an audience with Mao. And also W.E.B. Du Bois got an audience with Mao. And neither of those guys are heads of state, though they are honorary presidents of Black America, if you could say. Yeah, very interesting that the leader of the Black Panther Party couldn't get an audience with Mao, but Harry Haywood could. Anyway. On National Day, October 1st, we attended a large reception in the Great Hall of the people with Premier Chow En-lai and comrades from Mozambique, North Korea, North Vietnam, and the Provisional Government of South Vietnam. Normally, Chairman Mao's appearance is the crowning event of the most important Chinese celebration, but this year the chairman did not put in an appearance. When we entered the hall, a band was playing the Internationale, and we shared tables with the head of Peking University, the head of the North Korean army, and Comrade Chiang Ching, Mao's wife. We felt it was a great privilege. Everything I saw in China demonstrated that the People's Republic is a free and liberated territory with a socialist government. The way is open for people to gain their freedom and determine their own destiny. It was an amazing experience to see in practice a revolution that is going forward at such a rapid rate. To see a classless society in operation is unforgettable. Here, Marx's dictum, from each according to his abilities to each according to his needs, is in operation. But I did not go to China just to admire. I went to learn and also to criticize, since no society is perfect. There was little, however, to find fault with. The Chinese insist that you find something to criticize. They believe strongly in the most searching self-examination, and the criticism of others and, in turn, of self. As they say, without criticism, the hinges of the door begin to squeak. It is very difficult to pay them compliments. Criticize us, they would say, because we are a backward country. And I always replied, no, you are an underdeveloped country. I did have one criticism to make during a visit to a steel factory. This factory had thick black smoke pouring into the air. I told the Chinese that in the United States, there is pollution because factories are spoiling the air. In some places, the people can hardly breathe. If the Chinese continue to develop their industry rapidly, I said, and without awareness of the consequences, they will also make the air unfit to breathe. I talked with the factory workers, saying that man is nature, but also in contradiction to nature, because contradictions are the ruling principles of the universe. Therefore, although they were trying to raise their levels of living, they might also negate the progress if they failed to handle that contradiction in a rational way. I explained that man opposes nature, but man is also the internal contradiction in nature. Therefore, while he is trying to reverse the struggle of opposites based upon unity, he might also eliminate himself. They understood this, and they are seeking ways to remedy this problem. Very interesting. Huey P. Newton went there and said, yeah, y'all polluting way too much. Like, I could imagine China back then was probably hella dirty, man. Like, you got a coal plant right next to a pre-K, and the kids just breathing in soot. Just all that soot. Anyway, continuing here. My experiences in China reinforced my understanding of the revolutionary process and my belief in the necessity of making a concrete analysis of concrete conditions. The Chinese speak with great pride about their history and their revolution and mention often the invincible thoughts of Chairman Mao Zedong. But they also tell you this was our revolution, based upon a concrete analysis of concrete conditions. And we cannot direct you, only give you the principles. It is up to you to make the correct creative application. It was a strange yet exhilarating experience to have traveled thousands of miles across continents to hear their words. For this is what Bobby Seale and I had concluded in our own discussions 5 years earlier in Oakland, as we explored ways to survive the abuses of the capitalist system in the black communities of America. Theory was not enough, we had said. We knew we had to act to bring about change. Without fully realizing it, we were following Mao's belief that if you want to know the theory and methods of revolution, you must take part in revolution. All genuine knowledge originates in direct experience. Shout out to Chairman Mao. Very interesting that Huey visited, China, and as far as I know, he didn't visit the Soviet Union. I don't know exactly what Huey's opinions were on the Soviet Union. I know he mentioned earlier that when he was a kid, when the Soviets were trying to bring missiles to Cuba, he was supporting the Soviets bringing missiles to Cuba. He said partially he wanted to be a contrarian, but he was also sympathetic to the communist state, right? I don't know anything else. Nothing else comes to mind right now from this book. There's a lot that we've talked about and covered in this book, but the Soviet Union, if it was mentioned, left a very little impression. And I assume that's what Huey possibly wanted. Maybe he was more a Maoist or a fan of Chinese communism than more Russian state communism. I don't know. If you have any information, let me know. But continuing here. This is the final chapter. We are reading the final chapter of Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton. It's titled Chapter 33, The Defection of Eldridge and Reactionary Suicide. And after Chapter 33, we have the epilogue, and that will be a wrap. We are finishing Revolutionary Suicide. So if you have any comments, if you have any questions, if you have anything you want to say about this book or comments that you want me to read, put it in the chat. I will try to get to it at the end of the paragraph. So let's continue here. 33. We must undoubtedly criticize wrong ideas of every description. It certainly would not be right to refrain from criticism. Look on while wrong ideas spread unchecked and allow them to monopolize the field. Mistakes must be criticized and poisonous weeds fought wherever they crop up. Chairman Mao in the Little Red Book. The defection of Eldridge and reactionary suicide. A revolutionary party is under continual stress from both internal and external forces. By its very nature, a political organization dedicated to social change invites attack from the established order. I repeat. By its very nature, a political organization dedicated to social change invites attack from the established order, constantly vigilant to destroy it. This danger is taken for granted by the committed revolutionary. Indeed, oppression first shaped the spirit of resistance within him, and so it can neither defeat nor destroy his resolve. But he has two far greater enemies, the failure of vision and the loss of the original revolutionary concept. Either of these can lead to alienation from those the revolutionary seeks to set free. Eldridge Cleaver was guilty of both. When I came out of prison in August 1970, the party was in shambles. This was understandable for a number of reasons. Bobby and I had been off the streets and in jail for a long time, and it had been difficult to direct the party on a day-to-day basis from prison cells. Then, too, the party was harassed and beleaguered. Intelligence organizations throughout the country had become obsessed with the desire to destroy the Black Panther Party. Many of the brothers had been hunted down, imprisoned, or killed. These external assaults were formidable, but there was a far more serious reason for the party's difficulties, one that threatened its very raison d'etre. The party was heading down the road to reactionary suicide. Under the influence of Eldridge Cleaver, it had lost sight of its initial purpose and became caught up in irrelevant causes. Could not relate to it. The Black Panther Party had defected from the community. The party was born in a particular time and place. It came into being with a call for self-defense against the police who patrolled our communities and brutalized us with impunity. Until then, there had been little resistance to the occupiers. We sought to provide a counterforce, a positive image of strong and unafraid black men in the community. The emphasis on weapons was a necessary phase in our evolution, based on Frantz Fanon's contention that the people have to be shown that the colonizers and their agents, the police, are not bulletproof. We saw this action as a bold step in making our program known and raising the consciousness of the people. But we soon discovered that weapons and uniforms set us apart from the community. We were looked upon as an ad hoc military group, acting outside the community fabric and too radical to be part of it. Perhaps some of our tactics at the time were extreme. Perhaps we placed too much emphasis on military action. We saw ourselves as the revolutionary vanguard and did not fully understand then that only the people can create the revolution. At any rate, for 2 or 3 years, our image in the community was intimidating. The people misunderstood us and did not follow our lead in picking up the gun. At the time, there was no clear solution to this dilemma. We were a young revolutionary group seeking answers and ways to alleviate racism. We had chosen to confront an evil head on and within the limits of the law, but perhaps our military strategy was too much of a great leap forward. That's possibly one of the most interesting, fascinating, moving, and intelligent paragraphs in this book. And it's something that people don't talk about with the Black Panthers. Of course, carrying the guns, dressing up very cool is how the Panthers were known and are still known. But here, Huey is saying, maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was a mistake to overemphasize the guns, the radical look, the idea that they're going to just blow a hole in every pig, at least the threat of it by patrolling the neighborhood with shotguns in view. Maybe that was an overreach. Maybe it was a great leap forward. I know a lot of people like to claim the Black Panthers, their legacy. They like to look up to the image and think about the idea of these strong black men with shotguns and ARs and AKs and all sorts of shit patrolling the neighborhood. But here, Huey is saying in his own words, maybe the gun was a bad idea. And when you think about all the pain it caused him, 4 years of his life in jail, and most of it facing the death penalty, his comrades going to jail, some of them getting killed. Does Huey not back up what I say, that the gun will not liberate us? The gun will not get us free. I know there's a lot of black men out there who want to, parade around like they're the new Black Panthers and carry the shotguns and the pistols on their hips and all sorts of shit. Where did it get the Panthers? Huey is acknowledging right here in this paragraph that the gun was a mistake. The gun was a mistake. And there's ways to liberation. The revolution will happen through the people. The revolution will happen through the people. I know a lot of people like to misquote Gil Scott-Heron or just bring this quote up for no reason because they think it's edgy and cool. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not flow through the barrel of a gun of a bunch of hardhead, knucklehead militia members. The revolution comes from the people. When the people have had enough. That's the revolution. That's what we're looking for. And here, Huey is saying that what we did was give a misinterpretation to the people. The people looked at us with our guns and our berets and our black leather coats and said, those guys are going to be the ones to lead the revolution. No. Huey is saying here, maybe it should have been us teaching the people how to have the revolution, how to be revolutionaries. But I digress. Y'all don't want to hear that. Y'all just want to continue to give your money to the white man by buying more guns. You just want to give more money to the white man by buying more guns. Y'all niggas ain't never gonna get free. I'm sorry. I could talk all day about this, but I digress. Let's continue here. Let's continue here with Revolutionary Suicide, the final chapter of Huey P. Newton's memoir. So Huey P. Newton says, nonetheless, I believe that the Black Panther approach in 1966 and 1967 was basically a good and necessary phase. Our military actions called attention to our program and our plans for the people. Our strategy brought us dedicated members, and it gained the respect of the struggling peoples of the third world. Most important, it raised the consciousness of black and white citizens about the relationship between police and minorities in the country. It is difficult to realize now how much police relations with the black community have changed in 6 short years. Our communities are still not free from brutal incidents and corruption, but it is nonetheless true that police departments have become more sensitive to the problems of urban minorities. Today, it is the rare police commissioner who has not tried to establish some form of public relations between police and blacks. The average citizen, too, has a greater awareness of police abuses that once were systematically overlooked. This advance in consciousness is due in large part to our military phase. Ho Chi Minh said that military tactics made public for military reasons are unsound, while military tactics made public for political reasons are perfectly correct. We have done as he said. Our military strategies are now known for political reasons. So, I know it might sound like Huey is contradicting everything I just said, but I don't think he's contradicting himself. I still stand by his earlier paragraphic quote where he said, maybe this was a mistake. And yes, he can bring up these quotes from Mao that says military actions done for political reasons are perfectly correct. I still think that Huey would look back in total at what the Panthers did and say maybe the mistake was overemphasizing that, or not diverting away from that. Maybe that strategy was effective in getting people to know about the Panthers, getting the police to chill and stop murdering and beating up innocent, unarmed black people in the ghetto. Maybe that might have been a good strategy, but I think Huey would have said we should have pivoted to something else quicker. And they did pivot. They pivoted to the survival programs, like the free breakfast program and the ideological training camp that they set up in Oakland. You know what I mean? They did pivot. And those programs are just as famous as them with the guns. But I still think people pair the guns have to be a part of the Panthers. The guns have to be a part of the idea of what the Black Panther Party should be about. And that's not what it is. That's not what it is. But I'm going to continue here. Huey P. Newton says in Revolutionary Suicide in the final chapter, but the revolution is not an action, it is a process. Times change and policies of the past are not necessarily effective in the present. Our military strategies were not frozen. As conditions changed, so did our tactics. Patrolling the community was only one step in our 10-point program and had never been regarded as a sole community endeavor of the Black Panther Party. As a matter of fact, the right to bear arms for protection appeared near the end of our program as point 7 and came only after those demands were considered far more urgent. Freedom, employment, education, and housing. Our community programs, now called survival programs, were of great importance from the beginning. We had always planned to become involved in black people's daily struggle for survival and sought only the means to serve the community's needs. But the party was sabotaged from within and without. For years, the establishment media presented a sensational picture of us, emphasizing violence and weapons. Colossal events like Sacramento, the Ramparts confrontation with the police, the shootout of April 6, 1968, were distorted and their significance never understood or analyzed. Furthermore, our 10-point program was ignored and our plan for survival overlooked. The Black Panthers were identified with the gun, as he says right here. Eldridge Cleaver identified with other negative aspects of the party. It is not coincidence that he joined the party only after the Ramparts confrontation. What appealed to him were force, firepower, and the intense moment when combatants stood at the brink of death. For him, this was the revolution. Eldridge's ideology was based on the rhetoric of violence. His speeches abounded in either-or absolutes, like either pick up the gun or remain a sniveling coward. He could not support the survival programs, refusing to see that they were a necessary part of the revolutionary process, a means of bringing the people closer to the transformation of society. He believed this transformation could take place only through violence, by picking up the gun and storming storming the barricades, and his obsessive belief alienated him more and more from the community. By refusing to abandon the position of destruction and despair, he underestimated the enemy and took on the role of reactionary suicide. Long before Eldridge's actual defecting from the party, he had taken the Long before Eldridge's actual defection from the party, he had taken the first steps of his journey into spiritual exile by failing to identify with the people. So he began to separate himself from the people, is essentially what he's saying. Eldridge lost touch. He was too far gone. He was loopy. He shunned the political intimacy that human beings demand of their leaders. When he fled the country, his exile became a physical reality. Eldridge had cut himself off from the revolutionaries' greatest source of strength, unity with the people, a shared sense of purpose and ideals. His fight was a suicidal gesture, and his continuing exile in Algeria is a symbol of his defection from the community on all levels, geographical, psychological, and spiritual. From a dialectical point of view, something positive has arisen out of Eldridge's defection. While he and his followers still identify with aspects of the party that once alienated us from the community, the party has moved in a different direction. He has taken the media's image squarely upon his own shoulders. We are glad to be free of the burden. What little we lost in credibility, we have gained in a wider acceptance of the party by the community. We have reached a more There has been a qualitative leap forward, a growth in consciousness. Camus wrote that the revolutionaries' real generosity toward the future lies in giving all to the present. This, he says, grows out of an intense love for the earth, for our brothers, for justice. The Black Panther Party embraces this principle. By giving all to the present, we reject fear, despair, and defeat. We work to repair the breaches of the past. We strive to carry out the revolutionary principle of transformation, and through long struggle, in Camus' words, to remake the soul of our time. And that's the end. That's the end of Revolutionary Suicide, chapter 33. And that's a final nail in the coffin on reactionary sentiment, losing touch with the people, not being grounded is essentially what he's saying. Like, Huey was against the idea of being an armchair philosopher. Huey was against the idea of just sitting in your living room talking about it. He was like, you got to be outside. You got to touch the people. Pause. You got to be out there feeding the people, talking to the people, listening to the people. You know what I'm saying? And as Nelson is saying here, that was beautifully written and honest. And Huey was very earnest and forward thinking. Yes. Nelson says it was a great book. I totally agree. We have one final section. It's literally only one page. There's one page, it's the epilogue, where Huey is wrapping up the book. These are Huey's final thoughts right here in the epilogue titled, I Am We, one page. There is an old African saying, I am we. If you met an African in ancient times and asked him who he was, he would reply, I am we. This is revolutionary suicide. We, all of us, are the one and the multitude. So many of my comrades are gone now. Some tight partners, crime partners, and brothers off the block are begging on the street. Others are in asylum, penitentiary, or grave. They are all suicides of one kind or another who had the sensitivity and tragic imagination to see the oppression. Some overcame. They are the revolutionary suicides. Others were reactionary suicides who either overestimated or underestimated the enemy. But in any case, were powerless to change their conception of the oppressor. The difference lies in hope and desire. By hoping and desiring, the revolutionary suicide chooses life. He is, in the words of Nietzsche, an arrow of longing for another shore. Both suicides despise tyranny, but the revolutionary is both a great despiser and great adorer who longs for another shore. I repeat, both suicides despise tyranny, but the revolutionary is both a great despiser and a great adorer who longs for another shore. The reactionary suicide must learn, as his brother the revolutionary has learned, that the desert is not a circle, it is a spiral. When we have passed through the desert, nothing will be the same. You cannot bare your throat to the murderer. As George Jackson said, you must defend yourself and take the dragon position as in karate and make the front kick and the back kick when you are surrounded. You do not beg because your enemy comes with the butcher knife in one hand and the hatchet in the other. He will not become a Buddhist overnight. The preacher said the wise man and the fool have the same end. They go to the grave as a dog. Who sends us to the grave? The unknowable, the force that dictates to all classes, all territories, all ideologies. He is death, the big boss. An ambitious man seeks to dethrone the big boss, to free himself, to control when and how he will go to the grave. There is another illuminating story of the wise man and the fool found in Mao's Little Red Book. A foolish old man went to North Mountain and began to dig. A wise man passed by and said, "Why do you dig, foolish old man? Do you not know that you cannot move the mountain with a little shovel?" But the foolish old man answered resolutely, "While the mountain cannot get any higher, it will get lower with each shovel. When I pass on, my son and his sons will go on making the mountain lower. Why can't we move the mountain?" And the foolish old man kept digging, and the generations that followed after him. And the wise old man looked on in disgust. But the resoluteness and the spirit of the generations that followed the foolish old man touched God's heart. And God sent 2 angels who put the mountain on their backs and moved the mountain. This is the story Mao told. When we spoke of God, he meant the 600 million who had helped him to move imperialism and bourgeois thinking, the 2 great mountains. The reactionary suicide is wise, and the revolutionary suicide is a fool. A fool for the revolution in the way that Paul meant when he spoke of being a fool for Christ. The foolishness can move the mountain and oppression. It is our great leap in our commitment to the dead and the unborn. We will touch God's heart. We will touch the people's heart, and together we will move the mountain. And that is the official end of Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton. An excellent book. There were some parts I didn't like. I'm not a fan of part 5 of the book where he's talking about his court cases and stuff like that. I'm not a fan of, a lot of the talk about, trial and lawyers and stuff like that. But I did really like the theory aspects, learning more about this man's life, hearing about his childhood in my hometown of Monroe, Louisiana, where he is from as well. And also just getting very inspired, man. This was a young, brave, educated, dedicated, disciplined brother. And we should all look up to Huey P. Newton, as well as Bobby Seale, whose book we will eventually get around to reading one day. So shout out to both of these brothers, and much love to them and their legacies. All power to the people. All power to the people. Let me give a shout out to everybody who joined the live stream chat. Nelson Moreno asked, "What's next?" I don't know what's next. If you have a suggestion, I know you suggested a book a while ago, and I did download it. I forgot the name. I think it's called Capitalism something. We might read that because I saw it's a short text, and I think we could get through it in a week or so. So, if you have a book that you think we should do, put it in the comments. Capitalism, Realism. Yes. We might read that next because I got some time for that. So we might do that. We got movie reviews coming up. We have Goodbye Lenin coming up. I know I've been promising this for a while, but we got to get on that. And we got a lot coming on this channel. Like always, let me give a shout out to everybody who joined the live stream. Let me give a shout out to Layla Henderson, Afshana Shari, Wheelchair Jimmy, DLT Play, Harshad 786. Who else? Jevin Shonabam, Holly Preppy 68. Holly Preppy 68. Okay. Who else? David Formy, Dominic C, Bile Das Edits, and everybody else is going to watch this in the playback. I appreciate all of you out there. Be easy and peace. All power to the people. All power to the people.